Because it bears apples, right? The same thing with a pear tree, plum tree. Why don't we call them something else? We don't. Because they are known by their fruit, what they produce. And that's discerning. When you're walking through bloomers, trying to get a new fruit tree or blueberries or something like that, you're looking at what it yields. And that's what you're interested in. And that's what Jesus is talking about, especially when he's talking about the Pharisees. Because what does their fruit, what's the fruit of their works? Death. Because what are they doing? They're plotting to kill Jesus. They're plotting to destroy his message. They're standing against him. And they will experience the fruit of their works. And they will see it. And eventually even in their own death. And Jesus talks about this too. They're condemned already because of their choices and the things that they've done. And so when we look at the world, and especially ourselves, and this is that self-contemplation and examination when we're getting ready for communion, when we're pausing for that silence during confession and absolution, when we're navigating through the weeks of Lent, is looking at our fruit and being able to discern whether or not, where our allegiance is based on what we're producing in our life. So what do you think about that? And this is what it's good to be able to teach our kids about this too, right? Because who do you want your kids to spend time with?
Somebody decent.
So you want somebody that's bearing good fruit in the world, right? So that they can learn, and maybe, and especially if your children or grandchildren have mentors, at school or whatever, you want them to have individuals that, what makes a good mentor? How do you know if someone's a good mentor or a good leader? Well, I was a bad Christian leader. Just because you're Christian doesn't mean you're good, right? Huh?
Good morals.
Good moral. It's based on what's going on there, how they're managing their life, right? And that kind of stuff. It's just, it's a good thing. If you talk about a real Christian leader, someone that is honest about their failures, right? And their limitations. Joyce Myers, is a so-called Christian leader, but she is very famous for saying that she grew up being called a poor miserable sinner because she was in Lutheran when she grew up, and she said, "But I'm not poor, I'm not miserable, and I'm certainly not a sinner." Right? So there's a so-called Christian leader that is not honest. Right? And so there you go. All right, so this is the thing, is that when you're looking out over the world, we're discerning. We're not judging someone. And just because we're discerning something about what we see around us, doesn't mean we're ruling or judging that person is a horrible person, or that they're dead, or that they're sinful and lost and condemned and all that other stuff. That's way above our pay grade. So all we do is we use this as an opportunity for self-examination. If I was a tree, what kind of fruit would I be producing, and what would the world call me? Fruitcake? I'd be called worse. Good.
Good though.
Getting back to something different.
All right, yeah.
Verse 35.
Okay.
Excuse me, verse 36. I tell you, on the day judging people will give an account for every careless word they speak.
Yep.
In your community, you mentioned your sins are forgotten.
Yep.
So what would,
And they don't exist anymore.
what about these words that on our judgment day we're going to have to take an account of things that we spoke of?
Can't hear you.
He says, what about these words that say, these things that we've said, or you can throw in the things that we've done and said, right, we're going to be held accountable. What has Christ done to those things? Canceled them out.
Right.
They're gone. And they're forgotten. And so, what will you have to talk about?
Nothing.
They don't exist.
So the careless words that you speak of.
They're gone.
If you're a Christian.
Yes.
Yeah, they're gone. And that's why, I even joke about that with people when they say, well, what happens if I confess to you all these things, as the pastor, and you get the confessional seal, and then you get hauled in front of court, and you stand there, and you say, did David ever say X, Y, and Z? I said, no, because they're gone, right? I can't, actually, the confessional seal is the highest confessional and confidential standard in the land, even above client-attorney privilege. And so, it doesn't exist. This is gone. And that's because pastors can't talk about things that don't exist, and they can only speak truth. And so, that's the kind of the paradox about, or not paradox, but it's a hard thing to wrap our minds around. Because we have a memory, but God has the ability to wipe His away and to take things out of creation, make them disappear. But we can still remember. And that's why when scriptures talk about having a mind like God, won't that be a great day? To not have to remember all the things we wish we could forget. So there's all sorts of stuff.
Did I hear you right? God can remove things from creation,
Yeah.
so they never existed.
Well, they existed, but He has taken them out,
Okay,
destroyed them, and made them non-existent, and then
okay. But we can
Takes
still
them.
remember them?
well, just like an example. It's hard to wrap our mind around intellectually, right? But we experience this spiritual reality every time we sin to forgive Him. Because He has removed, as far as the east is from the west, so far our Lord has taken our transgressions from us, right? That beautiful psalm that we have. So we have that. He's taken it out of existence. It's null and void. It's gone. But yet we still have that scar on us. And it's not until we are made anew, when all things are made anew, that those things are no longer a part of us anymore. Even though God doesn't see us as having that, because we're covered by His blood. See, some things are only spiritually discerned, right? But see, it's hard to think about, right? How can we remember something that God has removed? It is. And like I said, it's beyond our understanding in terms of how our intellect works. It just isn't, we can't comprehend these things. And this is where God talks about this specifically. As high as the heavens are above the earth, so are my thoughts higher than yours. Right? There's things that we just can't, we can experience them, and they can spiritually touch you in ways that are beyond words. Like when individuals are at their last breaths, and they're at peace. And you think, how can you be at peace in this moment? Or you have individuals offering forgiveness when they were so horribly victimized in their families as well. This doesn't make any sense from a worldly standpoint. The fact that the Creator of the heavens and earth would come in the form of a servant and die on a cross, that does not compute with our reason and intellect. It just doesn't. And so faith and our intellect are at odds oftentimes. And it's the same thing for, so when we're talking about God being able to remove our sin from us, and yet us still remember it takes faith to grasp that promise as much as it does that Jesus was born from a virgin, and that He walked on water, that He did any of the miracles, that He rose from the grave, physically rose from the grave, and that He ascended and is coming again. All those truths and all that reality and promises, it's not intellect that wraps our grafts us into. It's faith. And this is Paul in Romans 5 and 6, right? What grafts you in to Jesus' forgiveness? It's faith. It's by faith you're justified.
With God, nothing is impossible.
Exactly. But we like to bring God down on our level and give him our limitations. Right? Well, how is it possible that he can make something not exist? I can't do that. Well, that's what makes him God. Right? But we like to do that. And actually, that's what all world religions really do, is they make a God that reflects humanity instead of humanity that reflects back the image of God and a whole bunch of different things we can talk about when we do that. But yeah, hopefully that's helpful and doesn't just confuse everybody. Yeah.
To answer the question, when my mother was dying, I went into her room at 4 in the morning to tell her something. And she hadn't been able to speak for several days. And she looked at me and said, "Did you have to give me?" And a couple hours later, she died.
Hospice work and has, they're just, it's a profound ministry. Really neat things you can't understand, I've shared stories with you guys about that before. One individual they had brought the hospice bed into the living room. He was non-responsive for 24, 48 hours. His 3 daughters were gathered around his bed. I was coming in to do our version of last rites. That's the anointing of the dying. And I walk into the room. His eyes open. Right? And he looks at me and says, "Did you give me communion yet?" It's clear as day. And I said, "No." And he said, "Why not?" So I went out to my truck and got communion. We got communion. And remember, he had been unresponsive for 24, 48 hours, something like that. But before that, he couldn't remember his daughter's name. His mind was failing long before that. He recited the Lord's Prayer without any hesitation whatsoever. And just shortly after that, then he died. But there's things that just you can't explain. I remember talking about it when I did chaplain work in St. Louis. I was talking with a surgeon after the surgery didn't go as planned. He was in the stairwell with me, and he starts talking and crying about how he can't wrap his mind around any of this medical stuff after he's been a surgeon for so long. Because people that come into the hospital that shouldn't live walk out the next day, and people that come into the hospital that shouldn't have anything wrong with them die the next day. And all his career, he's been taught, even as a surgeon, he really isn't controlling anything. And he can work as hard as he wants. But there's something else at work here. So really neat testimony. And that's what it goes back to. Yes, God's given us our mind and our intellect and our reason and rational thought, but those things need to serve our faith, not define it. Or our faith needs to not be in our ability to understand how God can remove something and it be no more. There needs to be a point where our reason just stops. And this isn't check your brain at the door, how we were accused of in the 90s. Christianity just wants you to check your brain at the door and just aimlessly go forward. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about understanding the limits of our reason and intellect. And understand that we have limits there. And from that moment, we step forward in faith. We get out of the boat like Peter and we walk.
So how are we accepting now that people can say, I identify with, we have a friend whose son is in junior high, and he rides a bus. And one of his fellow students, girl, identifies herself as a cat.
Okay.
So she dresses like a cat, and she scratches. And she kept going up to him and scratching and scratching. So he pushed her away. He got punished because she identifies as a cat. He was denying her. What
Yeah.
a reason, huh?
Really? It's getting...
I would say cats don't belong on the bus.
Cats don't belong in school. We never could raise animals in school.
So what was your question?
How did we get this? You know, it's funny because we went to a comedy theater and this Scott is running, plays Barney Fight, and he's running for president in 24. And one of his stands is that he's creating a new party. It's called the Common Sense Party, and not everyone can join. And I just think that is
It's a litmus test for it.
that is so fitting for this society today.
Well, and see, and here's the thing is, this is, you gotta pump, you know, and I always talk about pumping the brakes, right? Because it's easy to look at that girl and one, or even her parents, and start thinking in your mind all the things you would want to say to her parents. Like, why are you doing this, right? Or the school counselors that are giving your grandson detention or whatever. Thinking, what is going on? Right? But you have been given truth that's come from outside of you. And this is something we've been talking about over. Something, truth that's been come from outside of you that is actually true in life. You know the meaning and the purpose of your life. This is the the first word that you said sums it all up. They identify. That is what's so tragic. That this, a person's sum total of how they map out their existence, how they identify who they are, mind, body, and soul, is as something as, I mean, for this, you know, we laugh about it, but a cat. Right? Or let's talk about, you know, all of the gender confusion, right? This is what they identify. This is the sum total of their existence. And they're encouraged to celebrate that fact. When did we start parading around, literally, all this stuff? As if that's the only thing that matters. And that's really shows you we don't look at those people with hostility, but with compassion. Could you imagine if you didn't have that faith that clung to the reality that you were a child of God, and your identity and your purpose and your value was seen on the timbers of Calvary, and that you had the hope of the resurrection of all flesh and being reunited with all those individuals who have gone before you, and that heaven and earth will pass away long before you will ever have to worry about anything. You know, the kingdom of heaven endures forever, right? You have that. She has a cat. She has nothing.
She has a mental illness.
We don't, well, if that's the case, that we are called to defend these individuals, move them with compassion, and love them into the kingdom. And what the world has done is, and this is Satan, is saying that if you don't affirm her, you don't love her. Well, the reality of it is when somebody's doing something that hurts themselves, I'm not going to affirm them. I'm going to love them, because that's what real love does. It doesn't mean, come at her harshly. It means how can we, in Galatians 6, restore one another gently? Because take heart, you might fall victim to sin yourself. And how often do we do that? Where we see somebody else who's failing, or someone that's floundering, or someone that's struggling with somebody like an identity complex, and all of a sudden now we're wrapped up in the sin of anger and wrath and judgment and all those other things when that person needs just to be directed right back. And now I make sure that you understand, I'm not saying affirm it. No, that's, the world has taken the word love and affirmation and made it the same thing. And I had one, and I think I've shared this story with you. Got into a heated argument with a pastor one time when he said, you give me one example of when a parent is loving and says the word no. I said, when my child wants to run across the street without looking. I mean, it was that fast. Because if I didn't love my child, why would I care if they ran across the street without looking? But it's love that sets the boundary. We'll go here first and then.
There was an ad on TV with this father saying that his daughter had every right to choose abortion because it's her responsibility to choose whatever she wants to. And I said, okay, so then it's okay to drive drunk. If she wants to drive drunk, that's her choice, that's okay. If she wants to murder a classmate, that's okay, because that's her choice and that's what she wanted to do. Oh, come on.
See, and that is, thank you. These are the types of things that we need to be coming out and saying. Because the individuals that talk about reason and intellect and logic, themselves. Because when they come out and say, well, truth comes from within you, well, then that means everything's fair game. See, and that's what the problem is, and that was a little distinction I was making, is our truth came from outsiders. Because we know that we can't produce things, and that we need intervention in our life. And without him, we have nothing. And that's what makes God God, because he's not from inside of us. He never has been. He's always been outside of us, working on us and moving towards us. And that's what's such a huge distinction of why we can say this is truth, this is reality, because we didn't create it. And that's where you're always going to have this breakdown of logic there. Well, it's my choice, my body. Is it? Because everything that I grew up with said that everything I had in my life was entrusted to me. There's a big difference between that. Now we have to, as much as we see the damage and the darkness around us, we can't forget that but for the grace of God go all of us. You know?
Yeah, a few years ago, there was a book that was making rounds called The New Tolerance.
Yeah.
Do you remember who the author was?
I don't, but I remember reading something similar that was produced well before its time. It's on the heels of the sexual revolution. It was in the 1970s, called Liberal Love. Have you ever heard of that one? And that was something similar. What did you want to describe that?
Well, the New Tolerance, it was a negative take on the New Tolerance. It was saying that our society is becoming more and more tolerant and not addressing or confronting some of these things that we should not be tolerant of.
Exactly. And
I think I would like to get my hands on that book again.
yeah, and that's exactly right. There's certain things you should not be tolerant of, right? You should not just be forced to be okay with. And that's the thing, is if we continue to force tolerance of everything, again, it goes back to Mary's comment, everything goes, and you have to be okay with it. You're being, and this is the culture is being victimized by this, by being forced to be violated in this way, and you, not only are you having to be violated this way, you are supposed to be okay with it. And if you're not okay with it, then you need to work on yourself and go to trainings so that you can be okay with it. This is how you deal with, this is that old saying that we've known forever, right? How it is desensitization to so much stuff. And if you want to stop being troubled about something, immerse yourself in it so that no longer does it shock your conscience or offend you. It's just part of life. It's desensitization. Jennifer?
My sister called me last week and she had been to Bible study, and there was a woman in Bible study that was talking to her afterwards and was just in tears because her 17-year-old daughter had helped to schedule a mastectomy because she wanted to be a boy. And the mother is powerless. I mean, these people need our prayers too, and we're talking about it, but we're not having to actually live it. There's people out there that it's a nightmare for. And I just can't even imagine.
And that's what you guys maybe saw the flyer that I'm doing, that unapologetic female workshop coming up in August. And I love Pam Claremont. So funny, she said, you did this with the elderly well up in Virginia. You're doing it for Hermantown. When are you going to do it for us? Right? But, and that's the thing of why it's kind of the emphasis behind why I'm doing all this. It's because it makes me angry. It makes me angry the fact that the world's preying on our wives, mothers, and daughters. And in a word of tolerance or love and acceptance, the concept of femininity and womanhood is being stripped away and watered down to absolutely nothing. referring to it as a garden moment. You know, Satan is attacking Eve again. And all we're doing is just standing by it, just letting it happen. But the thing is with that particular thing, I ask this question all the time Wednesday, but this is a big part of one of my presentations, is out of all women here, how many of you were so excited to go through puberty? How many of you loved your body when you were 13 years old? You thought it was the greatest thing on the planet?
Well, I don't think we hated it as much as kids nowadays do.
Well, they're scared. They're scared to start menstruating. They're scared to see the chemical reactions in their body, to start growing breasts, the competition and the awkwardness of the bodies across the spectrum of the girls they go to school with. All of those things play into this huge insecurity. Now imagine if you were a 13-year-old girl experiencing 14, 15-year-old girl, experiencing all that insecurity, and the world telling you, if you don't like your body, that means you're probably really inside a boy. So let's go ahead and let's stop the puberty from happening. Here's some puberty blockers, and here's some testosterone while we're doing it so that you can try out being a boy to see if that's really what you want to do. And then, if that's something that you're comfortable with, then we can do some irreversible. And see, that's the thing, is they refer to surgery as irreversible procedures. Those chemical blockers are irreversible. You know, they potentially create irreversible damage inside the body. No, you're not cutting something off or building something and surgically altering your body, but you're making yourself infertile. You're weakening your bone structure. You're making you more susceptible to disease and shortening your longevity of your life. You're causing all sorts of problems that they're not even talking about. Right?
People are preying on the immaturity of young people's
Exactly.
minds.
They're taking the vulnerable, the most vulnerable, in my opinion, and who we should be protecting the most, our daughters, and they're preying upon them.
I wish they'd do a survey of how many of these people have this done, and are just now they're just sick about it. They wish they'd never had it done, and they would publicize that percentage.
We're not even anywhere close to being able to do that. She said that they wish that they'd be able to publish a survey. First of all, there's several organizations that are starting to come up with individuals that are detransitioning. I know a couple of them, really, really neat stories. But we're just now on the tip of the iceberg because the procedures haven't even, they're, most of the time, first of all, you know how much it costs out of pocket for somebody to be transitioned?
Nothing. Government's willing to pay for it.
Well, now, right? But there's a reason for that,
I know.
okay? Because if you wanted to transition, it would cost you a little more than $1 million. So why do you think there's a lot of legislation? I'm not a conspiracy theory guy, but sometimes you just follow the money, you know? But anyway, so you have all of this taking place, and again, I guess we're kind of out in the weeds now. But let's take it back. Let's go back to these individuals, these daughters, these sons, because it's not just girls. Boys experience the same thing, right? Because if they're a little feminine, maybe they like things a little bit different, you know? They're not the quintessential masculine American man, you know, maybe they're a little bit different. And instead of what we should be doing is just leaning in on them and promoting who they are, how God's created them to be, and equipping them and celebrating them, you have all these lies. Well, maybe you're really just gay. Or maybe your issue is that you're really a woman inside. Maybe you have both male and female spirits in your body. That's what the 2S is now at the end of the LBGTQIA 2S plus. 2S plus is two-spirited. So you can be both male and female.
You can have silence.
And you can also be two-spirited in the fact that have a spirit animal. Which reality, guys, this is another thing, it might sound ridiculous to you, that's Native American spirituality. Okay? That's this paganism. That's not kids playing dress up or lost. It is them lost in, a fictional reality and lies. But that's Native, a lot of Native American spirituality, where they have a spirit creature, and then on their awakening, on their journeys, pilgrimages, they would actually transform into this spirit, right? Whether it be an eagle. There's a great Disney movie out there called Brother Bear. I think that's what it's called.
Yes.
And that's Native American spirituality. But again, it takes what it takes, like what Jennifer's pointing out, is for this to be in your living room or in your daughter's bedroom or whatever for you to be on the web. When did all of a sudden, and this is what a lot of feminists right now are saying, which you never thought that the church would be aligning itself with radical feminists. Well, here we are. But you have what the feminists are saying, the world is going in and promoting this fictional reality and celebrating somebody living this fictional reality. That's a horrible thing to do, and you're not a woman or you're not a man, right? You are who you are. There's nothing wrong with who you are. And that's the problem, is that you and I as Christians, and as supporting the principles that we have in the faith, we get to go and tell these individuals, you don't have to make yourself something into something you're not. God made you. Yeah, and we get to tell you how great you are and help you learn how great you are. You don't have to change you. Physically, chemically, any of that stuff. And that's really what we have, and why this Christian message really needs to be getting proclaimed really, really hard. I don't know how you got us on
This was a good journey.
the cat. Steve.
I think it's really important that we are aware that this is all coming out of Marxism. Their agenda is to downgrade the masculinity of the family, which is obvious. Their agenda is to take the focus off of general morality and switch it around, just like what we're seeing here.
And if you remember, this is the word Marxism comes out, and everybody thinks, okay, now we're going to get into a political conversation. You have to take a step back. Remember, we did that woke Christian presentation back a couple years ago, last 2 Februarys ago. You have to remember that Marxism starts with dismantling the Christian church. It starts with that, as seeing Christianity as the opioid for the masses, and that they needed to be removed because it's the chief enemy of society and progress. And so, where people talk about, oh, that's a political conversation, it never has been a political conversation. It's about a satanic movement, an enemy movement from outside Christianity to destroy the Christian church.
We got to be aware of it.
And we have to be aware, right? And it came from, you have all that circulating, right? And remember, this is why we need to study history, right? It's because what were the Nazis?
Evil,
Besides that,
murder.
they were extreme socialists. That's what they were, which is rooted in Marxism. And survival of the fittest. Right? As much as people want to talk about American Christianity and equating us, that's why you have to understand Christianity and history, is that, it's almost like, and this has been really bothering me for like the last 15 years, is that whenever somebody disagrees with you, immediately they call you a Nazi. Right? It's like, oh, you're just a Nazi, right? Or you're just whatever.
When they practically are.
You have to remember what that was and where it came from. It didn't come from the Christian church at all. We get blamed for a lot of things. A lot of things we did that are really bad. Right? That's because the Christian church is full of sinners too. But you have to study history and you have to understand where these things really originate and what the point of it is. It's the undoing of society. And there's only one person in all of creation that's their sole goal in existence. And we have to keep our eyes on that. Yeah.
I often wonder when these gals that transgender to males, are they required to register for the draft because all males 18 and over? That's a requirement by the federal government.
Well, you know,
Would you want to fight for yourself?
thanks for bringing it around. Brian, I had us going around, right back into the world. Well, and again, see, and that's a perfect example. I'm going to pick on you. That's a perfect example of demonizing or making an enemy that person. We have to bring that individual and humanize them again. Don't bite off the bait of the world trying to get us against them. Because it's us against him in terms of Satan and the spiritual forces of this world. As soon as we start saying, well, what about this and what about that? Why is this happening? And these are horrible people and look at what they're doing. As soon as we start pointing at each other in terms of God's creation and God's people as being the problem, we lose sight of the enemy. And that's what Satan wants us to do. He wants us so immersed and messed up with blaming each other and fighting with each other, well, he destroys everything.
Yeah, very good.
Because if he can get us distracted with this over here and that over here, then he just runs roughshod over everything.
And he's done it.
And he's done it. And then we continue to fall victim to this old trick where he just says, hey, well, look at that, that person over there. You should really speak to how horrible that person is. When in reality, it's him that's horrible. That's a created person of God that needs to know truth and the gospel. That person needs to be the object of our love and gently restored into the kingdom. That is not the enemy. It doesn't matter what part of the political aisle or spectrum they're on. It doesn't matter what's going on in their life, how old they are, their gender, doesn't matter any of that. They are objects, and I know, I'm sorry. They are the mission target of the church. Satan's the enemy. And that's what we need to remember. All right, guys. Well, we gave it old college try. Let's pray. Lord, we thank you for this gift that oftentimes we lose sight of. We might even take for granted at times. The gift that is your truth. The gift that we know and believe that we are your children, purchased by your blood. And that we have purpose and identity wrapped up not in ourselves or something that we have to seek out, but what you've accomplished on the cross and that empty grave and will bring when you restore heaven and earth. We ask that you equip us to see those around us in our community, not as targets, not as the enemy, not as even just silly people, but your beloved children. And that you give us the opportunity to bear fruit in their life, fruit that will last, fruit that will well up for them eternal life. And we ask that you guide and direct us as we try to rise to this great challenge that the world's laid at our feet. And you give us compassion and humility and the words that are needed. And we ask this, Lord, all in Jesus' name.